I had spent the better part of a week sorting through the wardrobe in my attic. It was a pilgrimage of memories, a journey through decades of my life. Each garment held a story, a whisper of a forgotten party, a cherished anniversary, or a simple Sunday stroll. They were not just clothes. They were moments woven into silk, wool, and lace. My daughter-in-law, Anya, a woman whose every word was a calculated strike, had offhandedly mentioned needing fabric for a design project. She was a self-proclaimed influencer and fashion guru, and she had a tendency to speak of her own life in grand, theatrical terms, while dismissing the lives of others with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. I, in my naive hope to connect with her, had offered her my collection. It was an olive branch, a small gesture of a mother-in-law's love, a hope that she might see me not as an outdated relic, but as a person with a history worth sharing. I began my task with a feeling of quiet contentment. The dust in the attic was thick, and the air was heavy with the scent of mothballs and old paper, but to me, it smelled of life lived fully. I carefully unpinned a dress, a cobalt blue masterpiece from the late 1960s, made of a heavy, almost sculptural silk. I had worn it to my 25th wedding anniversary, a night my husband and I had danced until the soles of our shoes were slick. I remembered the way the light had caught the fabric, the feel of his arm around my waist, the look in his eyes that told me I was the only woman in the world. I held it for a moment, a silent tribute to a love that had long since passed, before folding it gently and placing it in the box. Next came a simple but elegant black wool suit from the 1980s, a piece of clothing that had accompanied me through countless job interviews and important business meetings. It was a suit that had made me feel confident, capable, and a force to be reckoned with. I ran my fingers over the fine wool, the memory of my career, the triumphs and the small defeats washing over me. I had worked hard, and this suit had been my armor. My hand trembled slightly as I folded it, a deep sense of pride swelling in my chest. Then there were the truly special pieces, the delicate lace of my mother's wedding dress, which she had insisted I keep, the vibrant hand-embroidered peasant blouse I had bought on my first trip abroad, a youthful adventure that now felt like a lifetime ago, a crimson velvet gown, a daring choice for a Christmas party in the 1990s that had made me feel impossibly glamorous. Each item was a page in a personal, unwritten memoir. I was not just giving her fabric, I was offering her a piece of my story, a tangible link to my past, hoping that she might appreciate the history, the artistry, and the love woven into each thread. Finally, after hours of painstaking work, the boxes were full. I carried them down the narrow attic stairs, my back protesting with a dull ache. My son, Mark, was out, but Anya was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. The television was on, blaring some reality show she was supposedly analyzing for her content. I announced my presence with a gentle cough. "Anya, my dear," I began, my voice soft. "I have those clothes for you. They're all from my attic. Some are very old, but the fabrics are magnificent. I thought you might find them useful for your project." She looked up from her phone, her eyes scanning the 4 large boxes with a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. It was as if I had presented her with a pile of garbage, not a carefully curated collection of my most cherished memories. Her thin lips curled into a smirk, and she let out a short, hollow laugh that seemed to echo through the silent house. "Oh, mother-in-law," she said, using the formal title with a cutting sarcasm that was as sharp as a razor. "You actually went through with it? I thought you were joking." My heart sank a little, but I pushed the feeling away. "No, of course not. They are from my collection. I know you said you needed fabric, and I thought—" "Fabric?" she interrupted, her voice rising in pitch. "This is not fabric, mother-in-law. This is a collection of dusty old rags, a tribute to a bygone era of questionable fashion choices and even more questionable taste." She stood up, walking toward the boxes as if approaching a toxic spill. She picked up a corner of my cobalt blue silk dress, holding it between her thumb and forefinger with a look of revulsion. "Look at this," she scoffed, turning to a camera she had set up on a tripod in the corner of the room. "The stitching is ancient. The color is so outdated. This isn't vintage. This is just old. It's what people wore before they knew any better." She dropped the dress, and it fell back into the box with a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot to my ears. I felt a flush of heat spread across my face. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I swallowed them back, forcing my voice to remain steady. "But Anya, some of these are high-quality, rare materials. My mother's wedding dress is in there. It's a family heirloom." Her laugh was even more condescending this time, a cruel, ringing sound that seemed to shatter the peaceful quiet of the afternoon. "A family heirloom? Mother-in-law, this isn't a museum. It's our house. And we don't have space for your museum of bad fashion and dusty memories." She grabbed one of the boxes, dragged it toward the front door, and flung it open with a dramatic flourish. "The trash is full today, but I'm sure the neighbors will enjoy a free show," she said, her voice dripping with venom. She started pulling out my dresses and tossing them onto the lawn one by one. The crimson velvet gown landed with a rustle, its rich color now a stark contrast against the green grass. The black wool suit, my suit of armor, was crumpled unceremoniously, a symbol of my humiliation. I stood there, frozen, watching in horror as the stories of my life were scattered across the lawn like so much garbage. The lace from my mother's wedding dress, a symbol of a love I had so treasured, was now a pathetic white puddle on the dirt. My heart was pounding in my ears, and a cold dread began to take hold. It was more than just the dresses. It was the utter lack of respect, the complete disregard for my feelings, for my history, for me. "Anya, please," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Do not do this. Those are my memories." She paused, turning to me with a look of theatrical pity. "Your memories? Mother-in-law, you need to get with the times. No one cares about your little stories. We live in the now, and right now, this is just clutter. Unsightly, embarrassing clutter." She took the last box, the one containing my peasant blouse, and tossed it toward the others. The box hit the porch with a sickening crack, and the blouse, along with a few other items, spilled out onto the front steps. I could not move. I stood in the middle of my son's living room, which was once my home, and felt a profound, debilitating emptiness. The walls seemed to close in on me, the silence deafening after her tirade. I felt a wave of nausea, a mix of shame and bitter regret. I had tried to give her something beautiful, something from my heart, and she had thrown it back in my face, a public spectacle of my irrelevance. My son, Mark, arrived home a few minutes later. He saw me standing there, my face pale, my eyes still wet with unshed tears. He saw the clothes scattered across the lawn. He saw Anya standing on the porch with a look of triumphant victory. He said nothing. He simply shook his head, a gesture of exasperated annoyance, and went inside, leaving me to stare at the ruins of my past. The humiliation was complete. In that moment, I realized that I was not just a burden, not just a nuisance. I was a ghost in my own family, a silent observer in a world that had moved on without me. The kindness I had offered had been twisted into a weapon, and I was left bleeding on the battlefield of my own home, utterly alone. I knew then, with a chilling certainty, that this was not a one-time event. This was the beginning of a cold, quiet war, and I was losing before it had even truly begun. The next few days were a blur of pain and forced politeness. Anya had not apologized. My son had not spoken to me about it. The dresses lay on the lawn for a full day before a garbage truck came and took them away, a final, unceremonious burial for my memories. I tried to go about my day as if nothing had happened, making coffee, reading my book, tending to my small garden. But inside, a fire was beginning to smolder, a quiet, dangerous rage I had not felt in years. I had given so much of my life to my family, to my son, and this was the thanks I received. I was no longer just a mother. I was an object of pity and ridicule. The dresses were just the beginning. I had a feeling that much more was to be lost. My dignity, my home, my very sense of self. The following week, Anya's insults continued, but they became more pointed, more personal. She began a subtle campaign of gaslighting, of making me feel like I was going crazy, that I was a burden, a problem. She would move things in the house and then accuse me of misplacing them. She would make snide comments about my cooking, my choice of television programs, my friends. My son would simply ignore her, his silence a tacit endorsement of her cruelty. I was an unwelcome guest in my own home, a place that had once been filled with laughter and love. The house, which I had helped pay for and had meticulously decorated, now felt like a prison. Every room was a reminder of my isolation, every hallway a corridor of my loneliness. The internal conflict was eating away at me. I was a woman who had always prided herself on her strength, her resilience, her unwavering love for her family. Now I was a trembling, unsure old woman, cowering in a corner, afraid of the next verbal jab. I would spend my days in my room, the sanctuary I had created for myself, staring out the window, watching the world go by. The friends I used to call, the coffee dates I used to have, the book club I used to attend, all of it seemed like a distant dream. I had become a recluse, a prisoner of my own making, trapped by my fear of confrontation. But the fire was still there, burning low in my belly. I could not let this happen. I could not let them win. I was a person, a woman who had lived a full, rich life, and I refused to let it end in such quiet desperation. The dresses were a sign, a cruel, painful harbinger of what was to come. I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea what. I was 73 years old and the world had changed around me, leaving me behind. How could I fight back against a force I did not understand, a cruelty that felt so alien to my heart? How could I find my place in a world that no longer seemed to have one for me? I began to spend more time in my room, the only place I truly felt safe. I would sit for hours, sifting through old photographs, a silent communion with my past. There were pictures of my husband and me, young and carefree on our honeymoon in Italy. Pictures of my son, Mark, as a boy, with bright, curious eyes and a smile that could melt glaciers. Pictures of my family, all of us together, smiling, laughing, celebrating. It was a stark contrast to my current reality. The people in these pictures, my son and his family, were now the very source of my pain. I felt a profound sense of grief, a mourning for a life that was not quite over but had been irrevocably altered. The grief was so overwhelming at times that it felt like a physical weight on my chest. But with the grief came a flicker of something else, a small, insistent spark of defiance. I was not going to let them erase me. I was not going to let them win. I did not know how I would fight, but I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I would. The old woman they saw, the one who was helpless and without taste, was not me. And I was going to remind them of that, one way or another. The days stretched into weeks, and the cold silence between us grew. Anya's insults became more brazen. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, she came into the kitchen, a look of disgust on her face. "Mother-in-law, what is that awful smell?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "Are you really serving that slop for dinner? It's so outdated. Mark and I are going out. We're going to a real restaurant where the food doesn't taste like it's from the Stone Age." I looked at the pot of my homemade beef stew, a recipe passed down from my mother, a dish that had brought my family comfort and joy for generations. I felt a surge of rage, a deep burning heat in my chest that was so powerful it took my breath away. "It's beef stew, Anya," I said, my voice dangerously low. "It's a recipe that has been in my family for 3 generations, and it happens to be my son's favorite dish." "Well, he's moved on from that," she said with a triumphant sneer. "He prefers things with flavor, with a bit of spice. You should try it sometime, mother-in-law. You might actually learn something." I could not believe the audacity, the sheer unadulterated cruelty of her words. She was not just criticizing my cooking, she was tearing down my history, my family, my very identity. My son, who had just entered the room, said nothing. He simply put on his coat, kissed her on the cheek, and left. He did not look at me. He did not say a word. I was invisible. A ghost in my own kitchen, standing over a pot of stew that was now as tasteless as her words. That night, I ate the beef stew alone, the food a comfort, and a deep, gnawing sorrow all at once. The silent house was a mausoleum of my broken dreams, a monument to a love that had soured, a family that had forgotten me. I sat there for a long time, the tears finally flowing freely down my cheeks, a torrent of grief and rage that had been building inside me for weeks. The dresses were just the beginning. The beef stew was a testament to the fact that I had lost my place at the table. I was an outsider, a relic, an inconvenience. But as the last tear fell, a new thought solidified in my mind. I was not a victim, I was a survivor. And I was going to remind them of that, in a way that they would never, ever forget. But first, I had to understand how to fight. I had to learn how to play their game, a game of cruelty and manipulation, a game I was not prepared for, but a game I was going to win. I was going to remind them who I was and who I had always been. The incident with the beef stew was the final nail in the coffin of my peaceful coexistence. The silence that followed was not just an absence of sound. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of contempt that hung in every room. My son, Mark, had retreated into a shell of passive indifference, and Anya had become more brazen in her campaign to erase my presence from the house and from their lives. The pain I felt was a physical thing, a constant, dull ache in my chest that would not go away. It was a grief for a life I once had, a love I once felt, and a family I had once believed was mine. But with the grief came a cold, hard resolve, a fire that was no longer a flicker, but a roaring inferno. I was not going to be broken. I was not going to be silenced. I was going to fight back. The first step was to observe. I began to watch Anya with a detached, clinical eye. She was a master of manipulation, a puppeteer pulling the strings of my son's life, and by extension, mine. She would use her phone, her social media, her influencer persona as a weapon, a shield, and a tool of control. She would post pictures of their new life, their expensive meals, their lavish vacations, and never once would I be in them. She was building a narrative, a story of a perfect life, and I was not a part of it. I was a ghost, a phantom, an inconvenient memory. She was erasing me from their reality, one social media post at a time. I began to feel a deep sense of loneliness, a profound isolation that was more painful than any physical wound. The house, which I had once loved, was now a hostile territory, a war zone of silent battles and unspoken rules. I would spend my days in my room, reading, writing, and thinking. I had always been a private person, a woman who valued her solitude, but this was different. This was not a choice. This was a prison. I was a prisoner in my own home, a prisoner of their cruelty. But the prison had a window, and through that window I began to see the world with new eyes. I began to see the greed, the selfishness, the raw ambition that drove Anya. She was not just a cruel woman. She was a calculated one. She was a woman who saw people not as human beings, but as means to an end. My son, my dear, sweet Mark, was her greatest prize, and I was her biggest obstacle. She wanted to be the matriarch, the center of attention, the queen of the castle. She wanted to erase me, to replace me, to become the new me. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making myself a cup of tea when Anya came in, a look of predatory glee on her face. "Mother-in-law," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I have a surprise for you. We've decided to remodel the house. We're going to knock down the wall between your room and the living room. We need more space for our new home gym, to keep up with the times. My heart stopped. My room, my sanctuary, my only place of refuge was going to be destroyed. I looked at her, my mind reeling, my voice caught in my throat. But where will I go? I stammered, my hands trembling, spilling tea onto the floor. She laughed, a cruel ringing sound that seemed to shatter the peaceful quiet of the afternoon. Oh, mother-in-law, do not be so dramatic. We've already found a lovely home for you, a retirement home. It's a lovely place. You'll have friends your own age. You'll have bingo nights. It will be a wonderful place for you to live out your golden years. I felt a surge of rage, a deep burning heat in my chest that was so powerful it took my breath away. A retirement home? Anya, this is my home. This is where I raised my son. This is where my husband and I spent our lives together. This is where I belong. She simply smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a shiver down my spine. You belong where we tell you to belong, mother-in-law. You are a burden. You are a problem. You are old. You are in the way. We need to move on. We need to live our lives. We can't do that with you here. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I swallowed them back, forcing my voice to remain steady. I will not go. You can knock down the wall. You can build a home gym, but I will not leave this house. She laughed again, a cruel, dismissive sound that was a testament to her utter lack of empathy. You have no choice, mother-in-law. We've already made the arrangements. The paperwork is being drawn up as we speak. You have until the end of the month to pack your things. After that, you are on your own. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the silent house, a death knell for my dreams, my hopes, my future. I stood there frozen, the spilled tea a dark stain on the floor, a symbol of my broken life. The tears finally came, a torrent of grief and rage that had been building inside me for weeks. I had been a fool. I had been a fool to believe that I was loved, that I was a part of this family. I was an inconvenience, a problem, a relic from a bygone era. I was a burden, and they wanted to get rid of me. But as the last tear fell, a new thought solidified in my mind. I was not going to be broken. I was not going to be silenced. I was going to fight back. I was going to remind them who I was and who I had always been. I was not a victim. I was a survivor, and I was going to win. I was going to show them that I was not a burden, that I was not a problem. I was going to show them that I was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had built a life with her bare hands, a woman who was not going to be tossed aside like a piece of trash. The next day, I began my campaign. I started with a simple act of defiance. I went to the library, a place I had not been in years, and I checked out a book on antique fashion, a book on the history of couture, a book on the art of collecting. I was going to learn. I was going to educate myself. I was going to become an expert. I was going to show them that my taste was not a thing of the past. It was a thing of the future. I was going to show them that my dresses were not just clothes. They were artifacts. They were a testament to a life lived fully, a life of beauty, of art, of culture. They were a testament to me. I also began to write. I started a journal, a private, personal account of my life, my memories, my experiences. I wrote about the dresses, about the beef stew, about the retirement home. I wrote about my son, my dear sweet Mark, and the man he had become. I wrote about Anya, her cruelty, her greed, her ambition. I wrote about the pain, the loneliness, the isolation. It was a cathartic experience, a way for me to process my emotions, a way for me to find my voice again. I was no longer a silent victim. I was a storyteller, and my story was going to be heard. My newfound resolve was a shield, a suit of armor against Anya's continued cruelty. She would still make her snide comments. She would still try to make me feel small, but her words no longer held the same power. They were just words, empty words from an empty woman. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. I was a warrior. I was a woman on a mission. I was going to win this war, and I was going to do it on my own terms. I was going to show them that a woman who had lived a full, rich life was not a burden. She was a treasure. And a treasure, I was going to prove, could not be so easily thrown away. The days stretched into weeks, and my education continued. I spent hours at the library poring over books, taking notes and making connections. I learned about the designers of my dresses, the history of the fabrics, the value of the embroidery. I was no longer a woman without taste. I was an expert, a connoisseur, a historian. I was a woman who had a secret that was going to change everything. I also began to visit old friends, people I had not seen in years. I went to see my old friend, Martha, a woman who had always been my rock, my confidant, my most trusted ally. I told her everything about the dresses, about the beef stew, about the retirement home. She listened with a silent, compassionate intensity, her eyes filled with a righteous indignation that mirrored my own. "You must not let them do this to you, Helen," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "You are not a burden. You are a treasure, and you have to fight for yourself. You have to fight for your dignity, for your home, for your life." Her words were a balm to my soul, a validation of my feelings, a confirmation of my resolve. I had a friend, an ally, a fellow warrior. I was not alone. I was not a victim. I was a part of a community of women who had lived full lives, who had stories to tell, who had wisdom to share. I was a part of a community that was not going to be silenced, that was not going to be erased. I began to feel a sense of hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness. I was not going to be broken. I was not going to be silenced. I was going to fight back. I was going to remind them who I was and who I had always been. I was not a victim. I was a survivor. And I was going to win. I was going to show them that a woman who had lived a full, rich life was not a burden. She was a treasure. And a treasure, I was going to prove, could not be so easily thrown away. The time for my departure was drawing near. The end of the month loomed large, a terrifying, looming deadline. Anya had begun to pack my things, unceremoniously throwing them into boxes with a look of triumphant glee on her face. My son Mark was still silent, his indifference a physical barrier between us. The house was a scene of chaos, a maelstrom of boxes, of dust, of memories. It was a house that was no longer a home. It was a house that was a battlefield, and I was losing the war. But I was not going to lose the battle. I had a secret that was going to change everything. I had a plan that was going to turn the tables, to show them that a woman without taste was not a woman without a mind, a woman without a past, a woman without a future. I had a plan that was going to remind them that a woman's worth was not measured in her clothes, in her social media presence, in her ability to fit into their little world. A woman's worth, I was going to prove, was measured in her dignity, in her resolve, in her ability to fight back. The morning of my supposed departure arrived with a cold, unforgiving grayness. The air was thick with the silent tension of a battle long fought and, from their perspective, won. My small, humble belongings were packed into a few cardboard boxes, sitting on the porch like abandoned strays. Anya's smugness was a palpable presence in the house. She walked with a bounce in her step, her every glance at me a silent, cruel victory lap. Mark, my son, still avoided my gaze, his silence a heavy cloak of shame and complicity. The retirement home bus was due to arrive at noon. They believed their little problem, their burden, was about to be permanently removed, but they were about to learn that they had not only misjudged me, but they had fundamentally misunderstood the true nature of what they had thrown away. I was in my room, now empty and echoing, wearing my favorite dress, a simple but elegant navy blue wool number. I was not packing. I was waiting. I had a folder in my hands, a simple manila folder that held the true account of my life. It was not filled with dusty old memories, but with the cold, hard legal truth of my assets, my estate, and my will. The woman they had called tasteless was about to show them what real wealth looked like. At precisely 11 o'clock, a sleek black town car pulled into the driveway, its engine a low purr against the silence. It was not the retirement home bus. A man in a sharp suit emerged, holding a leather briefcase. He walked to the door and rang the doorbell. Anya, startled and annoyed, opened it with a look of irritation. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice laced with the condescension she reserved for anyone she deemed beneath her. The man smiled, a professional, unreadable smile. "I'm here for Mrs. Helen Miller," he said, "the appraiser and auction house representative. My name is Mr. Evans. I believe she's expecting me." Anya's face went white. She turned to me, her eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly turning to panic. "Mother-in-law, what is this? What is he talking about?" I walked past her, my steps measured and deliberate. I looked at her, and then at my son, who had emerged from the living room, his face a pale, ghostly mask. "This is Mr. Evans, Anya," I said, my voice calm and clear. "He's here to pick up the paintings, the ones my grandmother left me, the ones you all thought were just old, dusty rags." Anya laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. "Paintings? What paintings? You have no paintings. You have nothing but those terrible old dresses I threw out." I looked at her, and then I looked at my son. "My dresses, Anya," I said, "were a red herring, a decoy. You were so blinded by your own snobbery and greed that you could not see the real treasure that was hidden right under your nose." I opened the manila folder and pulled out a photograph. It was a photograph of one of the paintings. The man in the suit, Mr. Evans, took it from my hands and held it up to the light. "This," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble, "is the centerpiece of Mrs. Helen Miller's collection, a lost masterpiece by the renowned artist, Alara Vance. It is a work of art that has been missing for over 70 years. It is priceless. And the other paintings in her collection are just as valuable." He then proceeded to lay out the cold, hard numbers. The paintings together were worth millions, a sum so staggering that it silenced the room, silencing Anya's protests, silencing Mark's questions, silencing the very air around us. The woman they had called tasteless, the woman whose clothes they had thrown out, was not a burden. She was a millionaire. She was a patron of the arts. She was a woman of immense wealth and power, a woman they had tried to erase, a woman they had tried to discard. But how?" Anya stammered, her voice a pathetic whisper. "How could you? You never told us." I looked at her, a cold, hard look that was a testament to the pain she had caused me. "I never told you because you never asked," I said, my voice filled with a quiet, powerful rage. "You never cared. You never saw me. You never saw a woman with a history, a woman with a legacy. You only saw an old woman, a problem, a burden. You only saw what you wanted to see. And now you will have to live with the consequences of your own blindness." I looked at my son, my dear, sweet Mark, the man who had abandoned me, the man who had let his wife's cruelty become his own. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, awe, and a profound, heartbreaking regret. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice a broken thing. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "You did not know, Mark, because you did not want to know," I said, my voice filled with a deep, sorrowful ache. "You chose to believe your wife. You chose to believe that I was nothing. And now you will have to live with that choice." I handed the manila folder to Mr. Evans. "The documents for the sale of the paintings are all in there," I said, "and the new will. I have left everything to the Alara Vance Foundation, a foundation dedicated to the preservation of art and the support of young artists, not to my son, not to my family, to a community that values art, that values beauty, that values history, to a community that values me. Anya screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and despair. She lunged at me, her face a mask of fury. But Mark, my son, my dear, sweet Mark, for the first time in months, moved to protect me. He grabbed her, holding her back, his face filled with a sorrow that was a testament to his broken heart. "Stop, Anya," he said, his voice filled with a final, desperate plea. "Stop. She's right. We made a mistake. We lost everything." I looked at them both, a mother and a son, two people who had once been my world and who were now strangers to me. I felt a sense of profound sadness, a mourning for a life that was not quite over, but had been irrevocably altered. But with the sadness came a sense of profound relief, a sense of peace. I was not a victim. I was a survivor. I was a warrior. I was a woman on a mission, and I had won. I walked past them, my head held high, my dignity intact. The man in the suit, Mr. Evans, opened the door for me, a silent, respectful gesture of a man who understood the true meaning of a woman's worth. I walked out into the cold gray morning, and I got into the sleek black town car. I did not look back. I had left the house of my son, the house of my memories, the house of my pain. I was going to a new home, a home of my own making, a home of peace, a home of dignity, a home of happiness, a home where I was not a burden but a treasure, a home where I was not a problem but a person, a home where I was not a relic but a woman with a future. And the car drove away, leaving behind a family that had been broken by their own greed, a family that had been destroyed by their own ignorance, a family that had lost a treasure, a woman, a mother, a part of their own soul,